Look, I've argued for months now that there must be more to this Thompson affair than we know. Why has it taken more than 3 years to investigate Thompson, which is basically about misappropriating union funds? Let's forget for a moment that they might have been used for travel or brothels or whatever. The fact is, there are 1.8 million union members in the country. They pay about $10 a week minimum in union fees. That's 18 million a week. That's nearly $1 billion a year. So let's be honest, who's going to miss a couple of 100,000? This is just a running tap. So as I've said, if you've got 72 Labor members in the House of Representatives and 32 are former union officials, how many of them might have done what Thompson did? If you've got 23 out of 32 Labor senators that are former union officials, how many of them might not pass the kind of scrutiny that's being applied to Thompson? Now, one of the most trenchant supporters of Thompson has been Julia Gillard. The presumption of innocence must apply, she said. Mind you, it didn't apply when they were attacking the Governor-General, Archbishop Hollingsworth, and there was no evidence of anything against Hollingsworth. They didn't care then about the presumption of innocence. So is there more to this than meets the eye? That's the question that needs to be asked. Now, the most powerful union in this nation is the AWU. Well, in 1992, Bruce Wilson was a senior official with the union in Western Australia. He was married with young children. He had a reputation for militant behaviour. He was known to act outside the law. He met Julia Gillard in the early 1990s. She was a partner in the law firm Slater and Gordon. She lived in Melbourne. She started a romantic relationship with him. On the 22nd of April 1992, Julia Gillard wrote out an application to the West Australian Corporate Affairs Commissioner to register a new legal entity. It was an incorporated association, the sort of entity that a local youth club might set up for a hockey team or a kids' footy club. Now, it allows the association to set up bank accounts, appoint a treasurer, and that sort of stuff. BHP, I might add, doesn't run its business through incorporated associations. Optus doesn't operate through such associations. If the local manager of the New South Wales branch of Telstra went to a lawyer mate and asked the lawyer to set up the Telstra New South Wales Accounts Receivable Association and started to pay Telstra bills into the account, he'd be in the dock along with the lawyer. Unions don't operate their activities either through associations. A union is a registered organisation under the industrial relations laws. Well, Julia Gillard, and as I understand it, her handwriting is on it, wrote out the application to register the Australian Workers' Union Workplace Reform Association. That was way back in April 1992. Now, according to a report by Detective Sergeant McAlpine of the West Australian Fraud Squad, who was, when this matter was before the Australian Industrial Relations Court, and because that's where it was registered in WA, and had investigated this quote-unquote fraud, only 2 people in the AWU knew anything about the existence of the association, Wilson and his accomplice, this bloke Blewett, Ralph Blewett. Well, Detective McAlpine wrote, quote, aside from Blewett and Wilson, no other person in the AWU had any knowledge of the existence of this organisation. Its formation or incorporation had not been authorised by the AWU. This is despite the fact that one of the objects of this new association was to promote the development of unions. And Detective McAlpine described how Wilson would visit large building companies and have them write out cheques to the AWU Workplace Reform Association. And apparently at least $540,000 went into the accounts. Well, McAlpine wrote, Detective Sergeant McAlpine of the WA Fraud Squad, quote, in addition to incorporating this new association and conducting negotiations with TEAS contractors without the knowledge of the AWU, Blewett and Wilson obtained a private letterbox at the Northbridge Post Office, to which all mail for the AWU Workplace Reform Association was addressed. The AWU, says McAlpine, Detective Sergeant McAlpine, was unaware of its existence. So Julia Gillard, a partner in a law firm, is in a romantic relationship with this bloke Bruce Wilson. He asks her to set up a new legal entity for the union. She asks for no resolution of the union, no minutes of the union meetings, no national approval for the new legal entity. She doesn't point out to her boyfriend that the rules of the union prohibit the establishment of a new entity like this association. If the new association ran the Tea Club or the Tats Lotto account, that might be one thing. But this little cash cow did much more than that. Well, as I understand it, a few months after it was set up, Wilson moved to Melbourne. On the 13th of February 1993, he signed a contract to buy a house in Fitzroy. He paid $23,000 in deposit. A few days earlier, he'd signed a cheque from the association's bank account for $25,000. Now, bear in mind, Julia Gillard says she knew nothing about why her boyfriend needed this new association for union business. She said she was young and naive and was, quote, terribly distressed when she found out what he'd been up to. And according to her, he was concealing it all from her. Now, he must have been very good because he chose her legal firm, Slater and Gordon, to do the conveyancing on the purchase of the house. Slater and Gordon, the firm in which Julia Gillard was a partner, wrote a letter to say that an amount of $67,722.30 would be required from Wilson and Blewett to complete the sale. The law firm said it needed a bank cheque. Well, the firm must have trusted Wilson. There was no bank cheque. Wilson signed a cheque from the very association that Julia Gillard had set up just a few months before. One of the rules of the association, written to satisfy the WA Corporate Affairs Commissioner, was, quote, the property and income of the association must be applied solely in accordance with the objects of the association. No part of that property or income may be paid or otherwise distributed directly or indirectly to members, unquote. Well, Wilson and Blewett at this stage still didn't have quite enough money in the account to buy the house. They needed an extra $150,000. Who lent them the money? Slater and Gordon, Julia Gillard's law firm. It gave them, as I understand it, a mortgage for $150,000. And the firm did the conveyancing for free. So this bloke was obviously Wilson, an important client. Julia Gillard was in a romantic relationship with him for 4 years, until he was caught out, as I understand it, in similar frauds using bank accounts in Melbourne. He was sprung in August 1995. Wilson had by then renovated the house he bought with the money he'd taken out of the union in 1993. He was dealing with many builders. Julia Gillard owned a house too. It was renovated during that time. And as the bank statements point out, huge amounts of cash came out of the AWU Workplace Reform Association. Cash cheques for $50,000, $8,000, $5,000 every few days. It does make Craig Thompson look a bit of a miser. We don't know where the cash went. Julia Gillard later produced a handwritten receipt from a builder to say that she had paid for the renovations to her own home herself. No one yet knows why $18,000 was paid directly to a women's fashion boutique in Melbourne, Town Mode. Well, in August 1995, it all came crashing down. Wilson left the union. The union paid back tens of thousands of dollars to various construction companies. And in October 1995, it was becoming very public. Wilson was gone. The matter had been raised in the Victorian Parliament. It had been reported that Julia Gillard was being sacked from her job with Slater and Gordon. Julia Gillard was interviewed by the Australian newspaper on the 12th of October 1995. She told the reporter Ebru Yaman, I'm still a partner with Slater and Gordon and I have no intention of going anywhere. Soon after that story ran, she was gone. Her desk was cleaned out. She's never practiced law since. She was without a job, as I understand it, for 6 months until Joan Kerner arranged a role for her as Chief of Staff with John Brumby. Wilson was never charged. He and his accomplice Blewett sold the house. The union received not 1 cent of its money. Well, a couple of people lost their jobs after trying to report this story. Michael Smith is one of them. Michael Smith was a policeman in Victoria. He served at the busy Collingwood and Port Melbourne police stations. He was in the regular army for 8 years. He's been a successful businessman, CEO of a national mobile communications carrier in Jakarta, Indonesia, the head of Telstra's global satellite business, the chairman of the board of the University of Queensland Business School. He was a director of the board of the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, and he actually ran the orchestra as CEO for 3 years. He was offered a job on Radio 4BC in Brisbane in 2008. He was very successful at that. And he moved home to Sydney, and last year he hosted Radio 2UE's afternoon show. And he was the top-rating daytime host on that station. But he lost his job over this matter. He's with me in the studio. Michael Smith, good morning.
G'day, Alan.
You have tried to raise this matter and lost your job. How powerful have been the forces seeking not to have this matter discussed?
Immensely, and it has been done through back channels, never through a direct legal approach. I know that on the morning that I was going to broadcast this matter, Julia Gillard herself telephoned the CEO of News Limited, John Hardigan, and made 3 demands of him. Number 1, that Hartigan withdraw a column Glenn Milne had published in The Australian that day. Number 2, that The Australian apologise for that. And number 3, that News Limited give her an undertaking that it would never again report in any way on websites or in its newspapers on this matter. Now,
but why would anyone agree to those sorts of demands?
You would have to be present in the conversation with Hartigan. What I was told by a very senior News Limited executive is that threats were made by the Prime Minister to harm the interests of News Limited if it did not comply with her direct demands of it. In my case, I worked for a radio station that was owned by Fairfax, and 10 minutes before I was due to go to air, after having recorded an interview with the former head of the union, Bob Kernahan, after having that exhaustively checked legally over the weekend and producing the various documents that my external defamation lawyer, the lawyer that Fairfax had engaged, required to substantiate the truth of the things that we were saying. We'd been right through that process. TUE was promoting the fact that this interview was going to go to air, so it had been approved by TUE management for broadcast. 10 minutes before I was to go to air, a senior executive in Fairfax from Melbourne telephoned and said, "You're not to broadcast it." And then it went on and on for a week or so, and ultimately they wouldn't permit it to be broadcast or spoken about in any fashion. And you have to wonder, Alan, as to what influence was brought to bear.
Now, the union fellow, Wilson, I mean, surely he could be located, couldn't he? I mean, has he changed his name or his appearance? It's being suggested.
I've spoken with him. I know where he is. I know what job he's got. I know what city he's...
But he most probably can't speak without incriminating himself, can he?
That is absolutely right, Alan. He seeks a, if he is to speak, the man seeks a, protection, immunity. There are others who are far more senior than him who are involved in this matter, and it really does go to the heart of unionism and the power of union chiefs.
And the Thompson affair.
It's identical, Alan. Michael Williamson, the HSU guy who's in the slot himself, Michael Williamson was to Craig Thompson exactly as another very senior union man, Bill Ludwig, was to this bloke Wilson. And the best way I can illustrate it is this. If you leave home to go to work this morning, you lock your house up, you've left $5,000 on the kitchen table. You come home, it's gone. You call the police, my money's stolen. And the police say, OK, we'll investigate it for you. They find fingerprints, whatever, they go and find the crook, they bring him to you and they say, here he is, here's the man who stole it. You look at the crook, it's your cousin, you know him. You go, oh, shit. And the police say, we're going to charge him, we want a statement from you, give us a statement and we'll charge him. You go, I can't make that statement. I can't do it to my cousin. Now, if it's your money and he's your cousin, stiff for you. That's your decision. But if you're a union official, it's not your money.
Not your money.
It's the members' money. You can't say, if you're Williamson, look, Craig Thompson has used all this money, etc., but say to the police, I'm not going to give you a statement. That's exactly what happened with Wilson. The union chiefs would not give a statement to the police that said, we own this money. When you go to the police academy, you learn the points of proof for theft. Dishonesty, you appropriate property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. If you don't have a statement from the owner of the money, there is no charge and no offence.
The recently appointed News Limited CEO Kim Williams said at the South Australian Press Club last week that the public's right to know is sacrosanct. Now, without apportioning innocence or guilt or whatever to the Prime Minister, does the public have a right to know what went on in this matter?
Absolutely, to have confidence in our system. Absolutely we have a right to know. You know, Alan, you look at the face of somebody in their 50s or 60s who has been subject to terrible abuse as a child. If the offender is brought to the dock, even a generation later, it gives us confidence in the fact that this is a just place. This is a just community.
Well, when the News Limited stuff happened in Britain, it was phone hacking and all that sort of stuff, Julia Gillard said that news organisations had serious questions to answer. From your understanding of this issue, does Julia Gillard have questions to answer without in any way suggesting she's innocent or guilty?
Absolutely. I can't make the judgment of innocence or guilt, but I can, as a former policeman, look at facts put in front of me and work it in my own head whether a prima facie case case is there to be answered.
Well, Robert McClelland is her former Attorney-General. Now,
Yes.
he, not me, he's raised these matters in the federal parliament. Wasn't he the solicitor at the Sydney law firm Turner Freeman,
Yes.
acting for the AWU union officers at the time, Bill Ludwig and Ian Cambridge?
Ian Cambridge, absolutely. And it was Ian Cambridge, as a former union official in the AWU, who is the first union official in this country to call for a royal commission into his own organisation. The former Attorney-General, Robert McClelland, prepared the paperwork for that. He asked for the royal commission, and I can see why, and I think it's still
To trace the misappropriated funds.
Absolutely, and to look at the role of senior union officials who can say to the police when the police come knocking and say, look, here's all this evidence, in the case of, say, Thompson as an example, the brothels, the cash, the ATM, etc. How can it be just that a union official can say to the police, I'm not going to give you a statement?
But if Cambridge called for a royal commission then,
Yes.
Julia Gillard has subsequently appointed him to Fair Work Australia.
You have to look at a number of appointments, including the recent appointment of a federal court judge who was a partner in the same law firm with her in the same department, the IR department. I would be looking very closely at a number of those appointments if I was conducting a Royal Commission of Inquiry into this matter.
But he has been, Cambridge, on one hand, calling for a royal commission, but then being appointed. He was the author of the affidavit when McClelland was the solicitor.
Yep.
Cambridge is now in the union-controlled Fair Work Australia, which has delayed the investigation into Thompson and so on and so forth. And he, as I understand it, hasn't pursued the Wilson-Gillard matter since.
That is true, Alan. I would say this in relation to that. He swore an affidavit with the penalties of perjury if he was false, if he falsely swore that affidavit. You read it. You read what he said about Slater and Gordon and its role, and Ms. Gillard was the partner who was involved in this position where she had a conflict of interest in having the sexual relationship with the man who headed up her client, the AWU. That was undisclosed to her partners, and the Law Council would have a view about the appropriateness of that.
Did she set up, the issue is here, as a lawyer, set up accounts from which, or into which, extorted funds were diverted? In other words, this bloke, this union heavy, was going around, I want this money, I want 25 from you and 30 from you and whatever from you, in order to get work done and so on. This was 20 years ago, this sort of thing happened. And then that was shoved into another account that the AWU wouldn't know about. Did she set up those accounts?
I know that her handwriting is present. I have had that analysed by the country's preeminent forensic handwriting analyst. His name is Paul Westwood. He's the same guy that helped me out in the Craig Thompson matter, who analysed the handwriting on the credit card chits, the signature. I am a layman. I can look at her handwriting, and I've got a copy of it here in front of me, and the handwriting on that form. It's identical, but the forensic expert tells me that it is, in all likelihood, on the balance of probabilities, written by the same person, by her.
Right, so the accounts then set up, that she, as the lawyer, opened, set up at the direction of Wilson and Blewett, have been described by an AWU executive as unauthorised, invalid, irregular, and used for, quote, possibly illegal purposes. Now, there were 13 of them, weren't there?
There was a large number of accounts that were set up. Wilson was given the flick from the AWU when the accounts that were established in Melbourne were discovered. And he was allowed to leave the union. In fact, he got a redundancy payment. Money was paid back to the organisations that had paid money into that account, those accounts in Melbourne. She, the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, was questioned about it publicly. She said, I have done nothing wrong. At that point, the account that she'd set up in 92 in Perth hadn't been discovered. It was discovered later, after he had left the union and after she had made that public protestation that she did nothing wrong. She had a duty, Alan, as a lawyer acting for the AWU, upon a report to her law firm, that fraud had been discovered. She had a duty to assist her client to find the location of any further monies that might be owing to it, including her knowledge of the fact that money had come from that, well, when I say her knowledge, the fact that a cheque drawn on the association she had set up had been used to buy a house for a person, not for the union, and she said nothing.
This was in March 1993. Slater and Gordon were involved in the purchase of this property at 85 Kerr Street, Fitzroy.
Yes.
And money that Tees contractors they'd got from Tees, as I understand it, the money from them were used to pay for the property. I mean, Wilson's signature was on the cheque.
Absolutely.
Tees, I must say, were apparently not aware that they were paying monies into a fraudulent account.
Correct.
Now, the house was sold in 1996. and the proceeds of the sale went to Wilson and Blewett.
Correct, yes.
Now, that was when Cambridge, the then National Secretary of the AWU in Cambridge, swore an affidavit.
Absolutely right.
And he said, I think his words, I'm unable to understand how Slater and Gordon, who were then acting for the Victorian branch of the Union, could have permitted the use of funds which were obviously taken from the Union in the purchase of private property of this nature without seeking and obtaining proper authority from the Union.
Absolutely right. And when his Melbourne frauds were discovered in 95, she said nothing about the existence of the Perth account. She said nothing about acting for him and his offsider in the purchase of the house in Melbourne, an asset that the Union could then have realised to try to get its money back. And weeks after that, she had left the law firm Slater and Gordon and never again practiced law.
So basically, this business, this fund, came into existence as a result of an application to the West Australian Corporate Affairs Commissioner to register an incorporated association.
Yeah, they're state-based.
And the AWU knew nothing about it.
Absolutely correct.
And money was being funneled out into that bank, the bank accounts of that.
Correct.
Okay, and Cambridge became aware of all of this. And swore this affidavit.
He hit the roof, mate. He hit the roof, as did Bob Kernahan, as would any just person in looking at this. That is why he was so active in calling for a Royal Commission into his own union. He wrote to the then Industrial Relations Minister, the federal one, Laurie Brereton, said, look, mate, the only way we're going to get to the heart of this, who was involved, is by having a Royal Commission. Now, Robert McClelland prepared the legal papers.
McClelland, who is he was the sacked, dismissed Attorney General.
Yes.
He was acting for Ludwig and Cambridge.
Well,
and he encouraged both of them, as I understand it, to submit affidavits to the New South Wales Industrial Relations Court.
Yeah, well, Con Shacker was acting for Ludwig.
Ludwig, right.
Up in Brisbane.
Okay.
But absolutely, it's factual that McClelland was acting for Cambridge, and McClelland prepared the papers, saw the documents, could see clearly what had gone on, and he said
He's still in the federal parliament. This is Robert McClelland still in the parliament.
Who said in the federal parliament, he said it, in the House of Representatives, he said, what I saw then, in the mid-90s in this matter, where I was on one side as a lawyer and Gillard was on the other side as a lawyer. What I saw then has coloured my view about unions. When I look at Thompson, when I look at the HSU, it's just eerily similar. I've spoken with Robert about this. It is eerily similar. Now, the Thompson matter could not have happened if the call for reform that Robert McClelland is now making had been heeded. In other words...
Yeah, he's basically saying he wants the laws tightened as they apply to union accountability.
Absolutely. If you're a shareholder in BHP and the boss of BHP is ripping off money and going to brothels and pulling big, large amounts of cash out of it, you as a shareholder, you can go. You can take action. The Securities Commission will have a look at it. If you're a member of the HSU and you put on the purple dress and you get up at 5:30 every morning and go and work in the furnace-like laundry in a hospital and you see Craig Thompson ripping off money and going and using it in brothels, etc., you've got no means to bring it to the attention of authorities, and that is wrong.
Ian Cambridge, who swore the affidavit, was appointed and called for the Royal Commission into his own union, was appointed by Julia Gillard to the union-controlled Fair Work Australia, which has taken an eternity and still hasn't fully reported on Thompson. Yeah,
look, Alan, there are a number of appointments that I would suggest require some scrutiny.
Let's not go to that. Just stick to this here. Right. I mean, as I understand it, the Industrial Court at the time ordered Wilson to repay some excessive redundancy pay that had awarded himself.
Yes, that's true.
And what happened to all the other money? Mate, was it spent like Thompson? Was it spent on credit cards and massage parlours and so on?
I went through the Thompson bank statements in chapter and verse, and you can see, like a lot of frauds I saw as a copper, they start out small, $100, $200, $300, and then the bloke goes, hang on a sec, I'm getting away with this. Then it's big. It was the same in this Wilson matter, except it was olden days. He didn't have access to the ATM. It's cheques. It started out fairly small, and then they're huge. You thought, oh, this is great. I'll buy a house, and away we go. At the time that it was discovered, and when Cambridge brought his action so vigorously before the court, the union went back to the court and made an application for more time to find where its assets were, and the union, headed up by Bill Ludwig, just allowed that to lapse, and nobody did anything. And now Paul Howes, the boss of the union...
What's he said?
...tells the ACTU Congress that we must run to ground all malfeasance, all the crooks have got to be found, they've got to be put in jail, and every cent of members' money...
money?
Mate, he's got the files. He today could commence an investigation. He today could heed the call of Robert McClelland to go and find the assets.
Accountability.
Absolutely right. And he has
Just one point. So Julia Gillard, as a lawyer with Slater and Gordon, wrote out the application to
Correct.
register the Australian Workers' Union Workplace Reform Association.
Yes.
And yet, the Slater and Gordon were representing that union,
Correct.
and lawyers for Slater and Gordon would automatically know that unions do not operate their activities through associations of this kind.
Alan, that
Would automatically know.
That union, that association was a sham. I have independently spoken with various defamation lawyers about that statement. I'm absolutely confident in the truth of it. It was established to do 6 things. It did none of them. It advised the Corporate Affairs Commissioner that if he registered that association, it would not do one thing, which is...
In WA, I might add.
Yeah, it would not do one thing, which is distribute money to its members. So, of the 6 things it said it was set up to do, it did none of them. Of the one thing it promised it wouldn't do, it did all of that, which is give money to the blokes who set it up. No one else in the union knew about it. It was conducted through a private post office box. It is inconceivable that bills that could have been generated by the law firm and forwarded to the Union Accounts and Payable Department for the purpose, it would have to say on it, for advice and work in setting up this association. It's just inconceivable that that could have been paid if it was fairly and properly conducted. You know what I mean?
Yep. So, is this the reason why the government has been, do you think, has been very, very slow to act on Thompson and very, very silent in offering any criticism about him?
The Labor Party is so closely affiliated with the union movement. It is so full of people who owe their job to the support of an individual union at the Labor Congress. The AWU is the most powerful of them, and have a think about this.
That's Bill Shorten's union.
And have a think about this one point. On the night that Rudd got the knife, who was it who went on the television, on the ABC, on Lateline, to announce why Rudd was going and that he'd be replaced with Julia Gillard? It was Paul Howes, the head of the AWU. Now, Julia Gillard is of the very far left, the socialist left. Bill Ludwig, the national president of the AWU, is of the far right. It's just noteworthy that she stood by him at the AWU's National Congress. I'm proud to call Bill Ludwig my friend. Well, Ms. Gillard, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
Well, just one final thing. Julia Gillard has said, previously when she's been questioned about this, she was young and naive, and that she was terribly distressed when she found out what the boyfriend, Wilson, had been up to. Would that be Wilson's account of things?
Alan, no. Now, look...
According to her, Wilson was concealing it all from her.
Yeah. Bruce Wilson lives now in a coastal town. He goes to work in a very old car. He's working in the kitchen at a club, a registered club. He works shifts there, cooking meals. He looks at Tim Matheson and Julia Gillard getting on the plane, and he thinks to himself about what he knows and what, if he was approached by authorities, he would have to say under oath. His account is very different from hers. And Alan, look, you just add this up. The weight of Cambridge's affidavit, what Ludwig has to say, what his offsider Blewett has to say, etc., and all of the documents, all of the bank statements, all of the handwriting analysis, etc., put all that on one side of the scale. On the other side of the scale, put this statement: I did nothing wrong. I was young and naive.
Okay, well, there we are. And that's Mike Smith, who actually, when he last tried to raise these matters, lost his job. It's a very strange world we inhabit.
Please indulge me in just one small statement. The hero of this affair is a man called Robert Kernahan, who was offered inducements, who was offered seats in the Parliament, who was bashed senseless in the street, who had bullets mailed to his home address. That man has suffered immensely and has never once wavered in his pursuit of the return of his members' money. And he, Robert Kernahan, is a hero.
All right, Michael. There we are. The public have to work it out for themselves. But nonetheless, in all of this, people are asking questions as to how this Thompson matter still remains unresolved. And the genesis of that failure to resolve may lie in matters that occurred many, many years ago.